We're going to transition now into some geometry and spend quite a bit of time studying geometry. Really, the parts of geometry, we're not going to cover all of geometry extensively, but we're going to really hone in on a couple different topics. The main things are we're going to talk about different types of measurement, and then we're also going to look at different shapes and some features of shapes, characteristics. The measurements are the one we're going to start out with is length behind me here. And we're going to look at different ways to measure length, different units of measurement, and ways to convert between them. Then we're going to take a look at things like measuring area, volume, weight, temperature, different types of measurements. And we're going to look at really two main systems of measurements or two main systems of units, the English system and the metric system, how you can do some conversions within those systems and between those systems. Okay, so we're going to look at all of that stuff for length, and we're going to look at that for area and volume later on, and then eventually with weights and temperatures. After we look at measurements, then we're going to really get into shapes, and we're going to look at different types of shapes, different features of shapes like areas and perimeters and circumferences. We'll look at polygons like triangles and rectangles and pentagons and things like that. And then we'll look at circles, and then we'll look at some three-dimensional objects that have volume like pyramids and cubes and things like that, spheres. Look at their surface areas and their volumes and things like that. So lots of stuff to get into with geometry, and there's some cool applications for those as well. But for right now, we're going to start off with a discussion on length, and really want to focus on different unit conversions for length. Okay, so we're going to start off, look at the English measuring system here for length. And the base units of measure within the English system are the inch, the foot, the yard, and the mile. Okay, and we abbreviate these measurements: IN for inch, FT for foot, YD for yard, and MI for miles. Okay, and you guys know, you probably have seen some of this before, but generally speaking, 1 inch is roughly the thickness of somebody's thumb. Roughly, I mean, everybody's thumb's a little bit different, right? But you can kind of think of it that way. So that's an inch. A foot is, kind of I always think of it, if you're a 6 foot tall person, your foot is close to 1 foot in length. Not always. My feet I'm 6'1", and my feet are a little bit short of 1 foot. They're probably more like 11 inches. So, but generally speaking, that gives you a pretty good estimate, right? It's pretty close. But of course, you can use a ruler or a tape measure to get more precision on those. A yard, I should go back to this. 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. These two things coincide. They're exactly equal to each other. So if you had 12 inches on a ruler or 1 foot on a ruler, they're going to be exactly the same length. That kind of made my hands go bigger, but no, they're exactly the same length. There's no difference between them. 3 feet and 1 yard. In fact, 1 yard is defined as 3 feet, the length of 3 different feet together. Okay, that's 1 yard. And then a mile is defined as 5,280 feet, 5,280. It's a very common measurement. Okay, so if you want to go 1 mile down the road, you're actually traveling 5,280 feet, and you could almost, if your feet were a foot apart, you could take steps, and unfortunately you can't see my feet right now, but I'm going back to back with my feet, and you could do that 5,280 times, and you'd be a mile down the road, okay, assuming your feet are exactly 1 foot each. Okay, so that's your English measurement system. We also have something called a metric system. Now, typically in the United States, we use English. A lot of the rest of the world uses metric. Metric has some very cool properties to it because it's all based upon base 10, the number 10, and powers of 10. Whereas English has all these weird measurements of 12 and 3 and 5,280 to get those combinations with The metric system, it's all just decimal movement, right? You're either multiplying by power of 10 or dividing by power of 10, which moves decimals left to right. And we saw that with percentages in the past when we looked at personal finance stuff, that percentages are formed by moving decimals back and forth because you're usually multiplying or dividing by 100. Well, here in the metric system, it's a power of 10, 100,000, and so on. This list is not complete. There's other measurements in here that you could have, but I'm just using the most common ones on this list. And even some of these aren't really that common. Hecto and deca are very rare as well. We don't usually use them. But anyway, the standard unit of measure for length in the metric system is the meter, okay? A lot of people would compare the meter to the yard in the English system. They're very similar. They're actually, they're not the same length, but they're close enough to be comparable, okay? So a meter, if you took a meter and you divided it up into pieces, you have some equal pieces. If you divided it up into 10 equal pieces, you'd have what's called a decimeter, okay? That's 1/10 of a meter. So you take a meter, you split it into tenths, and one of those chunks is called a decimeter. If you took the meter and split up into 100 chunks, 100 little pieces, or a decimeter into 10, that's the same thing, you get what's called a centimeter. Okay, that's going to be just a little teeny piece like this. And if you were to take a centimeter and cut that into another 10 chunks, so a little centimeter, cut it up into 10 pieces, you get what's called a millimeter. Okay, so these different prefixes, these are the prefixes on the word meter. A millimeter is 1/1000th of a meter. So if you took a meter, cut it into 1,000 pieces, you get one little millimeter, okay? You have 10 millimeters together, you get a centimeter. You get 10 centimeters together, you get a decimeter. You get 10 decimeters together, and you get a meter, all right? So these are the ones that are less than a meter. Now you have some that are bigger than a meter. So if you took a meter, if you took 10 meters and put them together, I can't reach my arms that far, I can only go about 2 meters, but beyond that, 10 meters, you get what's called a decameter, okay? Again, that's not a real common unit of measure, but it is a valid prefix in the metric system. We usually just say, instead of 2 decameters, you would say 20 meters usually, but you could use decameters. You could also use hectometers. That's 100 meters put together. And the more common one that we see is the kilometer or kilometer, but we usually say kilometer. Kilo is the prefix for 1,000. That's 1,000 of those meters put together, okay? So these relationships are very important. The relationship between them and how to convert between them is, again, just moving decimals or adding zeros or removing zeros, right? So if I wanted to figure out how many decameters are in 2 kilometers, well, for every kilometer is going to have 100 decameters, okay? So deca to kilometer, you have to add 2 more zeros, right, to get from deca to kilo. So if I had 2 kilometers, I've got to add 2 zeros, so that's 100 just to get up to 1, and then you need 200 to get up to the second one. So it'd be 200 decameters to get to 2 kilometers. Okay, so these are really quick to convert between if you remember just, how many zeros you need to go back and forth. That's really it, or decimal places to move. If you're talking about these fractions, obviously these powers of 10 can be written in decimal form, and so you can look at moving the decimal back and forth as well on those. And we'll talk about more details on those in a few minutes or in another video. I just want to give you a quick overview or summary of these. And then when we convert between the two, which is it's not always precise, the conversion between the two. Some of them we're considering precise. I don't know that they actually are, or if these are rounded off somewhere, but you can fit a little over 2.5 centimeters in 1 inch. It's 2.54 centimeters to be exact in 1 inch, okay? So you get 1 inch in length. Let's assume that's an inch, although I think that's a little wider than an inch. You should be able to get, 2. Well, that's going to be too big. Yeah, cut this a little nicer. 1, 2, and then a portion. So maybe more like that. So if that distance is 1 inch, then each of these is a centimeter, and then you've got this extra remaining 0.54 centimeters in there. And so it's 2.54 centimeters in 1 inch. So it kind of works out nicely that way. It's not a great conversion, but it works. Then you have the conversion from feet to centimeters as well. There's 30.48 centimeters in a foot, and really that's equivalent to 12 of these, right? So if you got 12 inches in a foot, you'd have 12 times 2.54 should give you this number, 30.48. I didn't check that ahead of time. I'm kind of curious. I'm pulling these numbers. These are the numbers that the book is giving me, and I think they're pretty good, but I just want to double check. 2.54 times 12. Yeah, it does give me 30.48, so that's exact. And then you have these two approximate conversions here, where you get 1 yard is approximately 0.9 meters. Now, they're not an exact match. In fact, I don't even think, I don't know that this decimal, this 0.9, is even a terminate. It might be an irrational number. It might not even terminate. I don't know the precise definition of that conversion. Your book is saying it's about 0.9, and it is, but it may be off a smidge, right? That's why they use the approximation symbol. So it's almost 1-to-1, but not quite. The meters are, a meter is slightly longer, right? One yard, if you wanted to make that conversion. And it seems weird because this is a smaller number, but if you think about it, you need one, obviously this isn't 1 yard, but if this was 1 yard, then it's 0.9 of a meter, so you'd have to go another 0.1 to get to the meter, right? So that's a meter. 1 meter, that looks like a terrible M. So 1 meter, so 1 yard is only 0.9 of that meter, if that makes sense. Okay? So actually the meter is longer by, quite a bit. Okay, well, not quite a bit, but, by a chunk. Anyway, they're very comparable. If you wanted to go 100 meters or 100 yards, there's a difference, but it's not significant, right? It's a very similar, if you're running a race or something, you're not off by that much. But there is definitely a difference, okay? Mile and a kilometer. There's another very common conversion because those are the bigger ones, the ones we measure like large distances, across land or something. And miles and kilometers, then for every mile you're going 1.6 kilometers. So on that one, the mile is actually the bigger one. All right, so what you have then is for every mile you would be going the same as 1 kilometer and then another 0.6 kilometers, right? 1.6 kilometers is 1 mile, so you get 1 kilometer is definitely shorter than 1 mile. Okay, hopefully that kind of makes sense. So it turns out in these conversions, the smaller number is actually the bigger unit because you're using less of the unit to get one of the other one. Okay, less than 1 unit to get one of the other one. Okay, so that's kind of how that works out. Obviously here 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters, so 1 inch is the bigger of the two. It takes more centimeters to get 1 inch, okay? So even though that number is smaller, the inch itself is bigger. Hopefully that makes sense. In a similar way here, 12 inches in 1 foot, right? 1 foot is, 1 is the smaller number, but a foot is the bigger unit. Okay, it takes 12 feet to get 1 foot, or 12 inches to get 1 foot. Okay, so anyway, bigger number goes with the smaller unit, and together they make the same size. Kind of works. Okay. So that's kind of cool, neat summary. What we're going to talk about next is something called dimensional analysis. Big words. But basically, it's just the idea of converting between all these different measurements, not just looking at the individual conversions, but if I had a, like, 52 inches, how many feet is that? That's those sorts of conversions. So we'll take a look at those in the next video.